Hello, welcome. If you like my video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon to get notification of new videos. Let's move towards the video. Megan had always felt safe in her own home until tonight. The night had begun just like any other, with her settling into bed after a long day, but everything changed when Peter, her teenage nephew, appeared at the doorway. She thought she'd locked the door, but something didn't feel right. Megan stretched out on her bed, the cool sheets clinging to her bare skin. It had been a long, exhausting day, and finally she could rest in the quiet solitude of her home. The sun dipped low outside, casting a warm glow through the window. She exhaled slowly, letting herself relax the creak of the floorboards nearby. Made her sit up, her heart skipped a beat as she glanced toward the doorway. Peter, her teenage nephew, was standing there, his figure dimly lit by the hallway light. "Peter," she asked, her voice soft but laced with curiosity, "what are you doing up?" He shifted awkwardly, his gaze flickering to the side before quickly returning to hers. "I couldn't sleep. I was just getting some water." Megan furrowed her brows. "It's late, you should be asleep," she said softly, trying to brush it off, but Peter didn't move instead. He took a step closer. Slow and deliberate, Megan's heart began to thud in her chest. His gaze didn't waver, and she instinctively tightened the blanket around her shoulders. "Peter?" she asked again, her voice cautious. "Now I thought I heard something." Peter mumbled, his tone hesitant. "Did you forget to lock the door?" Megan's stomach tightened. "I'm sure I locked it earlier," she replied quickly, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. "It's fine, just go back to bed." But Peter didn't answer. He kept coming closer, his steps slow and measured. Megan's breathing grew shallow, her eyes darting between him and the doorway. "Peter," her voice was a warning. "Now what are you doing?" He stopped just at the edge of her bed, his eyes clear. Searching, lingered on her for a moment. Too long. Megan shifted, slightly uncomfortable beneath his gaze, and then it happened. His gaze dropped briefly but unmistakably to her legs. A chill ran down Megan's spine. The realization hit her hard. He had seen her. Her bare skin, her exposed thighs. He had caught sight of her, and now he was standing there watching. Her heart pounded harder. Megan's breath hitched in her throat. "Peter!" She snapped, her voice rising in disbelief. "What are you doing?" Peter's eyes darted away, his face flushing. "I didn't mean to," before he could finish. Megan's voice hardened. "Get out," she commanded, pointing toward the door. "Now go to your room." Peter's face went pale, and without another word, he turned and fled the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Megan sat there in stunned silence, shaking what just happened like share and subscribe. If you want to know what happens next, Megan sat on the edge of her bed, still trembling from what had just happened. Her heart was racing, and the silence of the room felt suffocating. She glanced toward the door, half expecting Peter to come back, but the house remained eerily quiet. Her mind replayed the moment over and over, Peter's presence, his gaze on her, and that brief uncomfortable slip. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Something had changed between them. Something she couldn't ignore. As she rubbed her temples, trying to clear her mind, a sudden knock on the door startled her. "Mom," came Peter's muffled voice from the other side. Megan's eyes widened. She felt a wave of confusion and tension wash over her. "What do you want?" she asked cautiously. I'm sorry," Peter mumbled. "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean for it to happen like that." Megan's jaw tightened, her fingers clenched into fists. "Go to bed, Peter. I need some time alone." There was a pause on the other side of the door. Then Peter whispered, "Please, just let me in for a minute. I need to talk." Megan hesitated. Something about his voice, something desperate, made her uneasy. But against her better judgment, she sighed and unlocked the door. It creaked open slowly, and Peter stepped inside. He didn't meet her gaze immediately. Instead, his eyes darted to the floor. His posture was stiff, almost awkward. I, Peter began, his voice shaking slightly. "I didn't know. I didn't mean for things to get weird. I'm sorry." Megan frowned. Weird. Her tone was sharp. You think this is just weird? Peter sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I wasn't trying to. I wasn't thinking. Megan took a step forward. What were you thinking? She asked, her voice cold. You come into my room in the middle of the night and look at me like I wasn't looking on purpose. Peter interrupted quickly. His face was flushed and he looked genuinely troubled. It just happened. Megan scoffed, crossing her arms. It just happened. Peter, you saw me half dressed like it didn't mean anything to you. Peter's eyes finally lifted to hers, and for the first time she saw something. Beyond guilt in his expression, something darker attention she couldn't quite. Name flickered across his face. I didn't mean to, but it's hard to forget. Peter muttered, muted under his breath. Megan's breath caught in her throat. What did you just say? Her voice was a whisper now, barely audible. Peter hesitated, his jaw tightening. It's hard to forget what I saw. The air between them grew heavier, thick with unspoken thoughts, lingering guilt and something far more unsettling. Megan could feel it building, something wrong, something dangerous. You need to leave. She finally said, her voice sharp and firm. Go back to your room, Peter. We'll forget this ever happened. Peter's gaze dropped again. I can't. Megan's eyes narrowed. What did you say? I can't stop thinking about it. Peter whispered almost to himself, about you. The air between them grew heavier, thick with unspoken thoughts, lingering guilt and something far more unsettling. Megan's eyes narrowed, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anger. You need to leave, she finally said, her voice sharp and firm. Go back to your room, Peter. We'll forget this ever happened. Peter's gaze dropped again. I can't. Megan's eyes narrowed. What did you say? I can't stop thinking about it. Peter whispered almost to himself, about you. Megan's breath hitched. Stop it. Just stop. She turned away, pacing toward the window, her fists clenched at her sides as she tried to shake off the suffocating feeling of vulnerability. This isn't right. None of this should have happened. Peter followed her, his footsteps soft but deliberate. I don't know why it feels like this. He admitted, his voice quieter now. But it does, and it's not something I can just forget. Megan spun around, her eyes flashing with frustration and confusion. You're my nephew. This isn't normal. This isn't something we just brush aside. Peter's expression darkened. It didn't start like this. It wasn't supposed to happen. Megan's heart was pounding harder now. The situation spiraled into something darker, something she couldn't control. What do you want from me? She whispered, her voice breaking. Peter took a step closer, his gaze intense. Searching, I don't know. I feel something, Megan, and it won't go away. Megan's breathing quickened, her mind raced to push away the mounting fear. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding anymore. This was dangerous. You need help, she said firmly, taking a step back. You need to talk to someone. But Peter cut her off, his voice rising slightly. I don't need help. I just need you to understand. I need you to see it for what it is. Megan's eyes widened in shock. What it is? You're my nephew. This is twisted. You don't get to decide this. It's wrong. Peter's face contorted, his jaw tightening. It feels real to me. I didn't ask for it to be this way. I just feel something. Megan's voice trembled with anger. You need to stop this right now. This isn't a game. Peter's eyes locked on hers, something dangerous in them, something primal she couldn't ignore. I can't. His tone was softer now, but no less firm. Megan's hands trembled at her sides. She felt like she was losing control. You don't have a choice. You can stop. Peter stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. I'm sorry, but I don't know if I can. Megan's chest tightened and she took a step back instinctively. Bumping into the edge of her bed, her pulse throbbed violently as she felt trapped, exposed. Not just physically, but mentally get out. She whispered, get out before I. But before she could finish, Peter's voice cut through the tension. We're connected. Now there's no going back. The room spun around Megan. Her breathing became ragged. Panic bubbling beneath the surface. She had to get away. She had to stop this from going any further. You're my nephew, she snapped, shaking her head in disbelief. You can't mean what you're saying. Peter's gaze softened, but it didn't waver. I do, and I don't know what to do with it anymore. Like, share and subscribe if you want to know what happens next. Megan sat motionless on the edge of her bed, her mind racing. The weight of Peter's words hung in the air, suffocating her thoughts and fears alike. She felt like she was trapped in a nightmare, one she couldn't seem to wake up from. Her chest tightened and she ran her hands through her hair, trying to steady her breathing. She knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was something darker, something that threatened to unravel everything she had once believed. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling her attention. A message from her best friend Sarah popped up. Sarah, hey, hope you're doing okay. We need to talk soon. Call me when you can. Megan stared at the screen, unable to focus on the words. Her fingers hovered over the keys, but she couldn't respond. Bond, the only thing on her mind was Peter, his eyes, his confession, his touch. How did things get this far? The memory of their interaction replayed in her mind like a broken record, each detail more vivid than the last. The way he looked at her, the way his hand trembled. Those weren't mistakes, it was real, and it had happened because it couldn't be undone. Her thoughts spiraled as she realized something more chilling. It wasn't just a momentary lapse. Peter had been watching her, studying her longer than she'd realized, and now she was forced to confront a truth she had buried deep inside. This wasn't something she could brush off. It wasn't just a fleeting attraction, it was something deeper, something dangerous. As Megan's mind began to whirl, she caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of her eye. Peter was standing in the doorway. Once again, his expression unreadable, but there was something calculated in his gaze. This time, something unsettling. I shouldn't have come in here, Peter muttered. Breaking the silence, Megan looked up sharply, her eyes narrowing. No, you shouldn't have. You shouldn't have said what you did. You shouldn't have. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, Peter said quickly, interrupting her. I'm sorry, I can't control it. Megan's fists clenched tightly in her lap. This isn't something you just can't control. Peter, this is wrong. Peter's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. It didn't feel wrong at first. It felt right. You made me feel something I've never felt before. Megan recoiled, her stomach twisting in disgust. That's not an excuse. You're my family, my nephew. I know what it looks like. Peter said softly, his voice almost a whisper, but I can't help how I feel. I've never felt this way about anyone before. Megan's breathing quickened. She felt a mixture of fury and fear bubbling inside her. We can't do this. We can't keep pretending like this isn't happening. Peter took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers, but we can't pretend it isn't there either. Megan stood abruptly, her eyes flashing. We have to pretend you need to walk away from this. Forget what you think you feel. Peter's lips curled into a faint, bitter smile. It's not that easy. Megan's heart pounded harder. It has to be that easy. I won't let this ruin everything. I won't. Peter's expression darkened further, his voice lowering. You can't stop it. Not now. Megan's fists clenched tighter. I'm your aunt. I raised you. How could you let this happen? Peter's eyes glimmered with something dangerous, something she hadn't seen before. It wasn't just me, it was you too. Megan staggered back, her body trembling. The words hit her like a blow, ripping through her. Every defense. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Peter's voice trailed off, but the damage had already been done. Like, share, and subscribe if you want to know what happens next. The tension between Megan and Peter hung heavily in the air, suffocating every sound and movement. Megan paced back and forth, her mind racing. trying to make sense of what had just been said, what had just happened. Her breaths were shallow and her heart pounded in her chest. How had things spiraled so far out of control? How would she let him get this close? Peter, on the other hand, stood silently watching her. Every move with quiet intensity, his expression was unreadable, but Megan could see the internal struggle behind his eyes, as if he knew deep down that what they had done could never be undone. Finally, she stopped in her tracks, spinning to face him. Her voice came out cold, sharp. "You can't keep doing this, Peter. You can't." Peter's gaze didn't waver, though his jaw tightened. "It's not something I can just turn off." Megan, her eyes narrowed. "This isn't something you should feel. This isn't right. This is wrong." "I know," Peter said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "but it doesn't change how I feel." Megan's chest tightened as tears pricked the corners of her eyes. "This isn't something that should exist between us. You're my family. I raised you. How can you let yourself feel this way?" Peter's expression darkened, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I didn't plan for it to happen, but it did, and now I can't ignore it. You don't have to keep feeling this way." Megan's voice rose slightly, desperation and anger mixing. "You need to walk away from this before it destroys both of us." Peter stepped closer, his eyes locked onto hers. "I can't just walk away, not from you." Megan staggered back the room, spinning slightly as her mind fought to comprehend his words. "You have to, you must. I won't let you ruin everything, our family, our lives. This isn't just about feelings anymore, Peter. This is dangerous." Peter's eyes softened momentarily, but there was a vulnerability in his expression, one that gave Megan pause. "You're scared, I get that. I didn't mean for this to happen, but now that it's out, we can't pretend it didn't." "No," Megan said firmly, shaking her head. "We must pretend we have to." Peter's gaze hardened once again. "It's too late. I can't pretend it didn't happen every time I see you. Every time we're alone together, I feel it. I feel something between us, and it's not going away." Megan felt her body go rigid, a wave of cold fear washing over her. "You're my nephew. This can't keep going." Peter's voice lowered, his tone dark and quiet. "It can't stop now. I've already crossed a line." I can't erase. Megan's chest heaved as the words sunk in, each one heavier than the last. Her breathing became erratic, her mind screaming for a way out, but there was none. She couldn't escape what had already begun, and she knew deep down that Peter wouldn't stop. He couldn't. Not. Now the days that followed were filled with an unspoken tension, thick like a suffocating fog. Between Megan and Peter, they moved through their daily routines, avoiding prolonged eye contact and speaking only when absolutely necessary. Yet despite their best efforts, the tension never seemed to ease. Each glance, each passing moment between them, pulling them closer toward the inevitable one evening. As Megan sat alone in the living room, scrolling aimlessly through her phone, Peter quietly entered the room. His footsteps were measured, almost cautious, and Megan didn't lift her eyes from the screen, though she could feel his presence. It was as though her body instinctively knew when he was near. Finally, Peter spoke, his voice soft but strained. "We need to talk." Megan sighed. Placing the phone down on the coffee table, she crossed her arms, gaze steady as she turned to face him. "We've already talked enough, Peter?" "No," he insisted, stepping closer. "We haven't really said what needs to be said." Megan's heart pounded in her chest. She could already feel the trap closing in. "What is there left to say, Peter? This shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't even be possible." Peter stopped right in front of her, his expression filled with a quiet intensity. "It doesn't matter what should or shouldn't be. What matters is that it's happening and we can't ignore it anymore." Megan's jaw tightened, her fingers twitching at her sides. "But it can be ignored. We have to ignore it. It's the only way to protect everything. We have our family, our peace." Peter's eyes softened, his voice nearly breaking. "But it feels real." "It is real." Megan shook her head, voice wavering. "No, it can't be. We're not supposed to feel this. It's not meant to be." Sometimes, Peter whispered, things don't follow rules. Sometimes they break them, and maybe just Maybe this, what we feel, was never meant to be ignored. The weight of his words hung between them, heavy and unrelenting. Megan felt her breath catch in her throat, unable to look away from him. "Peter," she murmured, her voice trembling. "We can't." But Peter reached out slowly, his hand brushing against hers, his touch gentle but firm. "We already have." Megan's breath hitched, her body trembling beneath his touch for a moment. She let herself feel the forbidden spark that still burned between them. The undeniable pull, the yearning, but reality hit her like a splash of ice water. She yanked her hand away, stepping back quickly. This isn't just about us anymore, it's bigger than that. If someone finds out, if they know, I'll do whatever it takes to keep it from coming out." Peter said, his voice low but firm. "I'm not going to let us be torn apart, not by anyone." Megan's heart pounded painfully in her chest, fear and longing wearing within her. "You don't get it. Peter, we can't control this. It's already spiraling. No matter what we do, we're on a collision course, and I don't know if we can stop it." Peter stepped closer again, his voice softer now, almost pleading. Maybe we're meant to face it together." Megan's eyes filled with tears as she shook her head. "It doesn't matter what we're meant to do. What matters is what's right, and this isn't right. We can make it right." Peter argued, his expression desperate. "We can find a way." "No." Megan snapped, her voice shaking with resolve. "We can't and we won't. I won't let us go down that path." Peter's shoulders saged slightly, a flicker of defeat crossing his face. "Then what happens now if we keep ignoring it, if we try to move on? What happens to us?" Megan took a deep breath, forcing herself to steady her emotions. "We move forward. We pretend it never happened. We pretend that none of you ever happened." Peter's gaze dropped, his jaw clenched tightly. "But it's not that simple." "No," Megan said quietly, her voice breaking it. "Never was." And with that, she turned away, walking toward the door, leaving Peter standing in the quiet. Their connection severed, at least for now, but she knew deep down this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a silent war between them. A war they would both have to fight every day as long as they lived. What do you think happens next? Will Peter give up, or will he find a way to fight for what they feel, no matter the cost? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Don't forget to click the notification bell icon to stay notified.